Good afternoon, and welcome to another web seminar presented by Assured Partners Transportation and Encompass Risk Solutions. How to have your drivers and trucks ace roadside inspections. Before we begin, your lines have been muted for the duration of the webinar, but you can enter questions into the chat panel on the right. At the end of this seminar, if we have time, we will answer those questions. Now, a little bit about today's speaker. Ken Lacey is a vice president at Encompass Risk. He joins us with more than 20 years experience in the transportation and consulting industry. He's an expert in risk management, compliance, and a variety of other transportation-related fields, and he helps organizations to avoid the missteps of unmitigated risk and non-compliance. With that, Ken, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon. Today we're going to touch on ways, economic and efficient ways that you can incorporate into your everyday operations to allow both your drivers and equipment to do well and pass through roadside inspection seamlessly. By way of quick background, I spent the last 24 years working in the trucking industry in multiple capacities in safety, risk management, legal and compliance operations, finance, equipment financing and purchase, up to the point where for an 800 truck motor carrier comprised chiefly of owner-operators and about 300 independent agents, I was their president, and then moved over to the insurance industry upon sale, where I'd been a licensed broker and adjuster for a number of years. But jumping into this, first and foremost, prevention is the first step. As you look at the dashboard of this truck, imagine this from the standpoint of the inspectors as this crosses over and comes into a waste station. When waste station inspectors get together first thing in the morning, drinking their coffee or juice or whatever they may do, they'll talk about what they're specifically going to attack, whether it's brakes, lights, load procurement. There's going to be a focus. However, if there's something that comes in that's an exception that causes them to pull a truck back because they believe that there's going to be inherent problems, such as this, that will cause a truck to get pulled behind the scale immediately. So you look at this dashboard, and what do you see? You see a lot of debris, but you also see paper. So what does an inspector think? Well, they look at this and think, there's probably receipts there that may be timestamped documents that to the extent that the driver is still utilizing paper logs, they can use to go against those logs and check. Additionally, there may be one of any things that they look for, whether it's lights during darkness. They can easily see if all the lights are functioning. But you don't want to be that driver equipment is picked up as for a good thing. The objective has got to be for the equipment and or drivers to be transparent almost to where an inspector believes that they're not going to have a basis to pull that in. Next. And going to the point of load securement, if you have something like we show here on this slide with a load that is just crazy in the way that it's tied down and it can't possibly be safe, they're going to do something about that. But let's take that to the other way. Let's say that you're a flatbed operation. You've been hauling, and I had this many times. My former company did a lot of construction machinery, and coming from sites where they were taking it directly off the ground, a lot of mud, dirt, rocks, and if an inspector sees that that's buildup on the back of a flatbed, they're gonna write your driver up for it. So if the driver can just take a broom or take something and clear the debris off, it's a very it will hit them. It's having a bunch of stones on the back of the truck can be to an inspector just like having a loose board sitting back there, and they'll write them up for unsecured load. I mean, we literally had violations come in for unsecured load for having stones on the back of a flatbed and mud. And then I'd get pictures of it sent in from the driver saying that they didn't understand why they got wrote up, and they've got softball or grapefruit size clumps of mud and rock back there. They didn't understand why that could be a safety problem. And a lot of this is common sense, but some of it, the driver genuinely didn't understand the one time why. when I explained it to him and said, what if that went through it was a male driver, what if that went through the windshield while your wife was driving a car down the road? Um, so a lot of this can be training, but it's critical that they understand what it is that they're up against. Uh, Moving on to the next, tires. We had a time now. When I was getting on him, we had a roving inspector that found issues with his suspension and with his frame, and he took the position with me that to the extent that he had good tread on his tires and kept his equipment clean, that he would rarely be pulled into a weigh station, or more often times than not, if the inspector saw that he had a clean truck, good tread, and that his driver had everything in a clipboard ready to hand to an inspector. In this case, now be ready to hand the manual, the user's manual, and transfer instructions for an ELD. To the extent that all that was readily available to an inspector, more often times than not, his vehicles would get passed through a weigh station. And I took extreme issue with the violations that proposed violations that our own inspector had found, but in going through the inspections that he had gone to his equipment in the last 30 days, and there was about 4 of them. No violations were issued, and he had been through a number of level 1s. And I still took issue with him for having the violations, but truth be told, he was right. So it was just a lesson in general about what a lot of times the inspectors are looking at, and they are looking for things that will cause them either have safety issues or where they can get the meat of it and write up a number of violations. You look here, the best inspection is one that doesn't happen. If you've got flat spots on the tires or bald tires, that's a ticket to a weigh station, pull in. There's no question. If a police officer passes your unit going down the road, obviously they're going to pull it in. And this is something that's pretty basic. It seems obvious, but it's something that you see all the time. One of the things that can be done to prevent this is inflating the tires properly. Love's has got stations set up with multiple air hoses where you can pull in all your tires in a very short term, get the truck rolling down the road. That'll go a long way to prolong the use of and life of the tires, make your maintenance program much more successful, and again, cut down on the amount of inspections that you're having. Next. And air hoses. Chafing brake hose was one of the most frustrating violations that I used to see our guys get. And in fact, and I interviewed a number of different inspectors, probably the most prominent of which for me was a gentleman named Dennis McGee, who I hold in extreme high regard. And Dennis trained a lot of the mix-app officers that are in Pennsylvania that do inspections. And Dennis would comment that, anytime that they would see a brake hose lying on or near something else, they're instructed to assume, the inspectors are instructed to assume that it may have rubbed against it. It may in fact be chafing. So if you see where there's any contact points, and there's multiple in this picture, there's an assumption that those brake hoses might be at different points, and that could be a number of different violations. What we used to do was we instruct our drivers to either get brake hose protection, which you can get the gator hose wraps and get those around the brake hoses, or there are a number of guys that would get flexible garden hoses and wrap them around, slice them in the middle and wrap them around the brake hoses at any point where there was a contact point. And they would even comment to me that the inspectors would go by and remark and compliment them on the fact that it takes all the guesswork out of it. They don't have to look at anything. They don't have to check anything. They can look at the brake hoses and know instantly that they're okay, that there's not going to be any chafing. And what's more, and it goes to what the inspector is looking at. If she sees that there's that level of preventative measures taken, then they start gaining a level of trust as they go through the inspection, and they start getting faster with what they're doing, and they start giving some credit to the driver and to the motor carrier in terms how they're going to, what they're going to do with the inspection. It sounds like a lot of process that happens just by covering up brake hoses, but it does occur. Next slide. The next is, and again, this is a cheap, cost-effective way to make an impression on an inspector, but it also makes it easy for your driver. If you've ever seen these little plastic discs that fit around the push rod, they pop in place. They're open on the other side. They'll clip in place on the push rod, and it's an easy way to measure the travel of the push rod for either an inspector looking in or for the driver as she is utilizing it. It's simple to use, and once again, many times when the inspector looks in and sees these things in place, they'll realize that that's something that the driver is doing to be able to, or the driver and the maintenance operation is doing to ensure that the brakes are going to be maintained in proper. You can get bags of these to outfit an entire tractor and trailer for about $5, $2 to $5 a pop, and generally they last pretty long. Next slide, please. And again, going back to the tires, it's such a critical thing, and again, very apparent. There's no reason to have flat or bald spots on the tire, or have tires that look like this, but we've all seen them going down the road, and when inspectors see that coming in, they get pretty excited. And once again, it's a means or it leads directly to an inspection, something that can be easily avoided, and just part of a program to recycle out your tires. Next. Probable cause. So there's a list of probable cause states, and that's critical to know. Certain states, Kansas being one of them, I believe, you cannot get low inspection unless the inspector actually establishes probable cause, meaning that if they're going down and they're randomly looking at trucks, they have to have a basis to be able to pull a truck over to be able to do an inspection. That basis, if it's not a light being out or something of that nature, is speeding. If in fact the truck is going even 1 mile per hour over the speed limit, then that is a basis for the truck to be pulled over to get an inspection. If not, and think about this, if your trucks don't exceed the speed limit, then they can't be pulled over. They can certainly be pulled in for a weigh station. I'm not saying that. But while they're on the road, they can't be pulled over if they're not speeding and they don't have anything that's apparent to the police officer or enforcement officer, if you will, to be able to pull them in. And more times than not, in those states, that's where you'll see the flat speeding violation without the miles per hour that's being exceeded next to it, so that you're getting more points typically in those for speed violation than you would otherwise. So again, it's critical to know those states and then educate your drivers as to that. Next slide, please. And then the ELD mandate. A lot of times it's a good idea to have a sticker that says ELD used on board, or something indicating that the truck is using ELDs. Even in this environment where ELDs are required, there are still a lot of trucking companies taking advantage of the exceptions to the ELD rule, whether it's operating within 100 or 150 air miles, or one of the other exceptions. There's enough equipment out there that does not have an ELD in it, so it's good to let the enforcement officer know if in fact it's an ELD truck. The other thing too is that every driver is required to have the manual detailing how to download or get data from the ELD so that they can audit it. If they don't, that's an easy violation for them. So that's something that you should make certain that every one of your drivers has before she gets started. Next slide, please. And then lastly, consider joining the team. Every enforcement officer out there is a member of the CVSA, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. I had joined or I had my company join the CVSA many years ago, and there were certainly times, whether it was with SafeStat or then subsequently with CSA 2010, then just CSA, where my company would fall into a status where they might or should have their equipment inspected. When that occurred, we would always have the equipment outfitted with CVSA stickers, which is the equivalent of like having an FOP sticker on the side of your vehicle. There were many times where I was calls to our drivers stating that they had passed through a weigh station, even though they knew from perhaps a prior inspection that our company was in an inspect status through its ISS number, and they couldn't understand why that was occurring. This is why. That sticker, which at this point costs about $3 to $5, it's going up in value since there's quite a bit of demand for them anymore. But that sticker has got some meaning for the inspectors in the booth. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the inspectors are just going to follow through with their inspection. But again, this is a cost-effective way to perhaps allow you to avoid getting an inspection. That is the end of the presentation. We'll be available for questions. If there's any follow-up, anything else, my information will be provided with the contact info and Q&A. I hope that all of you found this useful, and I hope that you
Thank you very much, Ken, for that presentation. We do have a few questions that have come in. Let's start with, are there any other training approaches a motor carrier should take with regard to roadside inspections?
Sure, and thank you very much for that. A cost-effective way to train would be to do your own video. We actually had grabbed, most people have safety consultants. If you don't, that's a service that our agency can provide. But you can have your safety consultant, and it's always good, by the way, to have someone familiar with the CVSA or that's a member with the CVSA, because they're kept up to date with any changes to the inspection criteria. But you can actually create your own video, and it's cheap to do. We used to do them, and it would cost about $700–800. And again, that's something that we can also facilitate and coordinate happening and bring that in pretty cheaply. But we would do our own videos. I referenced that Chris do a video with one of our seasoned drivers and go through a full level 1 inspection just to show what a driver could expect at an inspection. And then Dennis also did a little bit of commenting as to what the inspectors were looking for, how to address them, and really just a survival tact for the inspections in general. And as I say, that's something that we could put together fairly easily.
Great. Another question, is there a list of probable cause states available, and where can I get such a list?
We can provide that. We have that. But yes, that's something that we can provide upon request. All you need to do is just shoot me an email or contact me by phone.
So again, to receive a copy of the slides or for any of the other information discussed here today, reach out to Ken Lacey at Encompass. And with that, this web seminar is now ending. Thank you and have a great day.